They lit up the silver screen with grace, charisma, and that ineffable glow we now call Golden Age stardom. The world adored them. Every smile they gave, every gesture, every scandal was meticulously captured and sensationalized. But behind the carefully curated glamour, some secrets were too dangerous to ever be whispered aloud, and some were denied forever. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to see will challenge everything you thought you knew about Hollywood royalty and how far they went to protect their legacy. Bạn có muốn tôi bắt đầu viết nhân vật đầu tiên không? Hay bạn muốn tôi liệt kê danh sách 20 cặp sao con bị giấu kín trước để duyệt? Clark Gable and Judy Lewis, the daughter he denied. For millions, Clark Gable was the ultimate Hollywood man, dashing, powerful, and unapologetically masculine. To the world, he was Rhett Butler, the king of Hollywood. But behind the legend lay a secret he took to his grave, his hidden daughter. In 1935, Gable had a passionate affair with actress Loretta Young during the filming of Call of the Wild. She became pregnant, a scandal of catastrophic proportions for an unmarried Catholic actress and a leading man already entangled in a complicated marriage. Hollywood studios couldn't afford the fallout, so Loretta vanished from the public eye, hiding her pregnancy under the guise of illness. Months later, she returned to adopt a baby girl, her own biological daughter, with a fabricated story to legitimize the child's existence. That baby was Judy Lewis. Raised believing she was adopted, Judy never truly understood why she looked so familiar. Her prominent ears and unmistakable jawline mirrored Gable's, and the rumors around town were deafening. Even as an adult, she was denied the truth until she confronted Loretta, and her mother finally admitted everything. Clark Gable never publicly acknowledged Judy. He never called, never wrote. He died in 1960, having played America's ideal man while quietly rejecting the most human role of all, father. Judy Lewis went on to become an actress and writer, but carried the weight of silence for most of her life. In her memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, she revealed the devastating emotional toll of being hidden, erased, and deliberately unloved. A child of two stars, denied by one, concealed by the other, and yet undeniably Hollywood's legacy. 2. Charlie Chaplin and Norman Spencer Chaplin, the son who died in silence. To the world, Charlie Chaplin was a comic genius, a pioneer who transformed silent cinema into an art form. But in his private life, Chaplin was haunted by scandal, controversy, and a deeply painful chapter almost no one ever speaks of: his firstborn son, Norman Spencer Chaplin, whom he tried to forget. In 1918, Chaplin, then 29, married Mildred Harris, a 16-year-old silent film actress. Their union was chaotic, riddled with rumors and pressure from the press. When Mildred became pregnant, it should have been a moment of celebration. Instead, it was cloaked in dread and silence. Their son, Norman Spencer, was born deformed and tragically lived for only 3 days. Chaplin never spoke about him in public. No statements, no mourning in newspapers. It was as if the child had never existed. Behind closed doors, Chaplin was reportedly devastated. But rather than memorialize Norman, he buried the pain in work and in silence. It's as though the infant's death was an inconvenient truth in the mythos of Charlie Chaplin, the eternal childlike tramp who made the world laugh. Even Mildred, who later separated from Chaplin, rarely discussed the baby. In a time when infant death was shrouded in shame, particularly if the child was born with disabilities, the couple distanced themselves from the tragedy. It wasn't until decades later, when researchers dug into Chaplin's early life, that Norman Spencer Chaplin's brief existence was publicly acknowledged. A child once erased, now part of the record. Hollywood knows how to craft illusion. But for Chaplin, the silence around his first son revealed a more somber truth. Some wounds can't be acted away. Number 3. Ingrid Bergman and Pia Lindstrom, the daughter caught in scandal. To her fans, Ingrid Bergman was the embodiment of elegance and moral grace, immortalized in Casablanca and revered across continents. But in 1950, the world turned on her when she became the center of one of Hollywood's most explosive personal scandals. At the time, Ingrid was married to Swedish surgeon Petter Lindstrom, and they had a young daughter together, Pia Lindstrom. Ingrid kept Pia out of the public eye, raising her quietly in the United States while continuing to ascend as an international film icon. But while filming Stromboli in Italy, Ingrid began a passionate affair with Italian director Roberto Rossellini, The romance led to a very public pregnancy, despite the fact that Ingrid was still married to Petter. The scandal rocked America. Ingrid was branded an apostle of degradation on the Senate floor. She was denounced by the public, exiled from Hollywood, and forced to relocate to Europe. But in the chaos, one child was left behind: Pia. Ingrid gave birth to a new son in Italy with Rossellini, then twins, but she did not take Pia with her. Instead, Pia remained with her father in the United States, separated from her mother for years. To the public, Pia was almost invisible. For a long time, few even knew she existed, the hidden daughter of an icon whose name had become synonymous with disgrace. Pia would eventually reunite with her mother later in life, but their relationship remained distant. In interviews, Pia spoke candidly about the emotional cost of her mother's abandonment, describing herself as a child sacrificed to fame and passion. Ingrid Bergman's story was one of professional redemption, but the personal damage left scars that even time couldn't heal. 4. Loretta Young and Christopher Lewis, the second child she tried to shield. Most people know the scandal of Loretta Young and her secret daughter with Clark Gable, Judy Lewis. But few realize that Loretta harbored another hidden child, one born not in sin, but in silence. After the drama surrounding Judy, Loretta worked relentlessly to reconstruct her image as a devout Catholic and doting mother. When she later married Tom Lewis, a radio producer, the public saw it as a stabilizing chapter, a clean slate. What the public didn't see, however, was the emotional complexity that still clouded Loretta's family life. In 1944, Loretta gave birth to a son, Christopher Lewis. Unlike Judy, Christopher wasn't a secret child born of scandal, but Loretta made a conscious choice to raise him away from the spotlight. While she paraded her career as a symbol of virtue, Loretta rarely spoke of Christopher publicly, avoiding press coverage and deflecting personal questions. For years, the public hardly knew he existed. Most fans assumed Judy was her only child. Why the secrecy? Partly image control. Loretta, still grappling with her past scandal, wanted to protect Christopher from the kind of exposure and shame that had followed Judy. But it also came from a deeply rooted belief in emotional containment, a desire to control what the world could see and what it couldn't. Christopher later became a writer and film producer, quietly working in Hollywood, but always in the shadow of his mother's legacy. He spoke kindly of Loretta, but his subdued presence left many wondering whether he had simply learned to live as the son of a woman who kept her emotions and her children private. It wasn't scandal that hid Christopher Lewis. It was something even more haunting: fear of reliving it all again. 5. Errol Flynn and Arnella Flynn, the forgotten daughter in the Caribbean, swashbuckling, reckless, charismatic. Errol Flynn was the quintessential bad boy of classic Hollywood, with a life as wild off-screen as the adventures he portrayed on it. But beyond the headlines, lawsuits, and intoxicated exploits was a daughter he barely acknowledged, and who would ultimately die in obscurity. Arnella Flynn, born in 1953, was the child of Errol Flynn and his third wife, Beatrice. By then, Flynn's star had dimmed and his health was failing. He had retreated from Hollywood's spotlight and taken refuge in Jamaica, a place that would serve as both sanctuary and exile. Arnella grew up largely without a father figure. Though her mother tried to provide structure, Errol was frequently absent, traveling, drinking, or spiraling into debt. He died when Arnella was only 6, leaving behind little more than his notorious name and a legacy of indulgence. Hollywood quickly moved on, and so did the world. Arnella, half starlet, half shadow, drifted between modeling and quiet seclusion in the Caribbean. She struggled with identity, with expectations she never asked for, and with the invisible weight of being a forgotten daughter of one of Hollywood's most notorious men. In 1998, at just 44 years old, Arnella Flynn was found dead in her modest apartment in Jamaica. The cause? Undisclosed, but the whispers suggested years of emotional decline and substance struggles. She had no fortune, no fame, and no press coverage. The world barely noticed. What makes her story haunting isn't just that she was hidden, but that even after death, she remained invisible to the legacy her father left behind. She was the daughter of a Hollywood legend, and yet she died alone, unknown, and uncelebrated. 6. Joan Crawford and the twins, the adoption cloaked in mystery. Joan Crawford built an empire out of image control. From rags to riches, from silent films to Oscar glory, she presented herself as the ultimate survivor, fierce, glamorous, and in control. But behind the glitz and steel-like poise was a family history veiled in secrecy, especially when it came to the two children she adopted under the most puzzling of circumstances. In 1947, Crawford announced she had adopted twins, Kathy and Cynthia, through a private arrangement. The adoption was sudden. No one had seen her pregnant, of course, but no reputable adoption agency claimed involvement either. In fact, the state of California had no records of the twins' adoption at all. Whispers began to circulate. Who were these babies? Were they purchased illegally? Were they even twins? Years later, investigations and interviews revealed a disturbing picture. Some sources allege that Crawford had bought the babies from a baby broker in Las Vegas, exploiting legal loopholes to avoid background checks due to her growingly erratic reputation. Others claimed the children weren't biological twins, just made to appear as such for the sake of publicity. Kathy and Cynthia grew up in Joan's mansion, under her iron rule. While they never publicly condemned her like their older sister, Christina Crawford, who wrote the infamous Mommy Dearest, they never fully defended her either. The emotional coldness, the performative affection, the pressure to play the Crawford children on command. After Joan's death in 1977, she left both Kathy and Cynthia out of her will, just like Christina and her brother Christopher. The twins vanished into private life, far from Hollywood's radar. Whether they were victims of a flawed system or participants in a twisted PR machine, one thing is certain: their existence began in obscurity and remained there. Children brought into a spotlight they never asked for, then pushed back into the shadows when the curtain fell. Number 7. Charles Chaplin and Carol Ann, the alleged daughter who fought for recognition. While Charlie Chaplin built his global fame through pantomime and pathos, his personal life unfolded like a soap opera written in secret ink. Marriages to much younger women, legal battles, exile, and political controversies marked the latter half of his life. But none of his dramas proved as quietly haunting as the existence of Carol Ann, the alleged daughter he never acknowledged. In 1942, during World War II, Chaplin became entangled with Joan Barry, a troubled, aspiring actress with whom he had a short-lived and turbulent affair. The relationship quickly devolved into chaos, restraining orders, threats, and ultimately a paternity lawsuit when Barry claimed she was pregnant with Chaplin's child. The studio heads were horrified. America was at war, and Chaplin, the once beloved icon, was now an aging foreigner, accused of seducing and abandoning a young American girl. The FBI, already suspicious of his political views, seized the opportunity to dig into his life. Chaplin denied being the father of the child, Carol Ann, and submitted to blood tests, which showed he could not have been the biological parent. Yet, in an astonishing legal twist, the court ruled Chaplin was legally responsible anyway, due to outdated laws about moral obligation and public image. Chaplin was forced to pay child support for a daughter he insisted was not his. He never saw Carol Ann, never sent letters, never left her a word in his will. Carol Ann, in turn, grew up in the shadow of a man who simultaneously defined cinema and denied her existence. For decades, she fought to be recognized, not as a gold digger, but simply as someone with a rightful claim to the truth. Today, the DNA evidence remains murky. But what's clear is that Carol Ann's name rarely appears in the official biographies. She was erased not by death, but by omission, a life shaped by the question, what if he had said yes? A daughter written out of the script by the master of silent film himself. Number 8. Marlon Brando and Miti Brando, the daughter the press never followed. Marlon Brando, the method acting god, redefined masculinity and performance in American cinema. But while audiences obsessed over his magnetic presence in A Streetcar Named Desire or The Godfather, few ever asked about his quieter, hidden legacy, the daughter he fathered on a remote island and then quietly left behind. In 1962, Brando traveled to French Polynesia to film Mutiny on the Bounty. There, he became enamored not just with the landscape, but with Tarita Teripaya, the young Polynesian actress who played his on-screen wife. Brando, 38, and Tarita, only 20 at the time, began a real-life romance that led to marriage and children. Among them was Miti Brando, born in the late 1970s. But while Brando's children from earlier marriages or affairs were widely documented, Often dragged into the spotlight by the media's obsession with the Brando name, Miti lived in relative obscurity, thousands of miles from Hollywood, shielded from the chaos of her father's deteriorating fame. Marlon was rarely present in her life. By the time she was a child, he had retreated into his Los Angeles compound, battling depression, lawsuits, and the emotional fallout of his son Christian's arrest and daughter Cheyenne's suicide. His visits to Tahiti became less frequent, and Miti became one of Brando's most forgotten children. She wasn't disowned, but she was never acknowledged in the same breath as his American children. No red carpet photos, no trust fund interviews, no tabloid features, just silence. Today, Miti lives quietly in Tahiti, fiercely private, having never spoken publicly about her father, not even after his death in 2004. Her existence is a living reminder that even the greatest actors of all time couldn't act their way out of emotional detachment. A daughter born from an exotic Hollywood affair, then exiled by omission. Asher 9. Judy Garland and Lorna Luft, the child overshadowed by a legend. Judy Garland was more than a star. She was an icon, a symbol of both unbreakable talent and unrelenting tragedy. Her voice shook nations. Her pain bled through every lyric. But while the world wept over Dorothy's journey and Garland's personal struggles, one of her children lived in the dimmest corners of her blinding spotlight. Lorna Luft, the often overlooked daughter. Born in 1952 during Garland's tempestuous marriage to producer Sid Luft, Lorna entered a world already crumbling. Her mother's career was spiraling. Addiction, mental breakdowns, and failed comebacks consumed the household. But while Garland's eldest daughter, Liza Minnelli, basked in the glow of her mother's fame and later inherited it, Lorna became a background figure in her own family drama. The public barely noticed her. Press attention went to Liza, Garland's firstborn, with director Vincente Minnelli, a child wrapped in Broadway pedigree. Lorna, in contrast, was just the other daughter, sometimes photographed, seldom mentioned. Growing up in Garland's chaotic orbit was a harrowing experience. Lorna recalled nights spent comforting her mother, watching her self-medicate just to function. She wasn't hidden in the sense of being denied, but emotionally, she was a ghost in her own home, present yet invisible. It wasn't until decades later that Lorna Luft told her side. In her memoir, Me and My Shadows, she laid bare what it meant to be the forgotten Garland, a child simultaneously adored and ignored. She described the emotional neglect, the fragility of love when addiction ruled the house, and the deep yearning to just be seen as a daughter, not a prop in a larger-than-life tragedy. Lorna never changed her name, never ran from her legacy. But for years, the world refused to see her for who she was. A daughter not hidden by scandal, but by silence and comparison. A child born to a legend, but fated to live in the long and lonely shadow of Oz. 10. Anthony Quinn and Francesco, the secret son in the shadows of Rome. Anthony Quinn, the rugged star of Zorba the Greek and La Strada, was known for his commanding on-screen presence and even more commanding presence off it. A man of passion, culture, and charisma, Quinn fathered at least 13 children. But one of them, Francesco, remained hidden from the world for decades. In the late 1960s, while married to his second wife, Quinn had an affair with Catherine DeMille, daughter of legendary director Cecil B. DeMille. But it wasn't that affair that bore Francesco. It was another, lesser-known relationship with a woman in Italy, far removed from the media scrutiny of Los Angeles. Francesco Quinn was born in Rome in 1963 and was quietly acknowledged by Anthony, but never publicly embraced as part of his Hollywood family. Francesco spent much of his early life in Europe, away from the glamour of red carpets and studio contracts. While his father paraded his other children at premieres or social events, Francesco's presence was conspicuously absent. It wasn't until the 1990s that Francesco, determined to carve out his own identity, emerged as an actor in his own right. He appeared in films and TV series, often portraying intense, conflicted characters, not unlike the shadow he had lived under for so long. His resemblance to Anthony was striking, unmistakable. In interviews, Francesco spoke cautiously about his upbringing, always respectful of his father, but never denying the emotional complexity of being half-claimed. He once remarked, "There are many kinds of love. My father had his way of showing it, not always the way a child hopes." In 2011, Francesco Quinn collapsed and died suddenly at age 48 while jogging with his son. His death barely made headlines in Hollywood, a painful echo of the half-life he had lived. A son born from secrecy, molded in silence, and ultimately lost without ever being fully seen. 11. Lana Turner and Cheryl Crane, the daughter hidden behind closed doors. To the outside world, Lana Turner was the ultimate Hollywood bombshell, a vision of blonde perfection who conquered the silver screen in the 1940s and 50s. But behind the scenes, her real life unfolded like a noir tragedy, centered around her daughter, Cheryl Crane, a child hidden not in anonymity, but in trauma. Cheryl was born in 1943, the product of Turner's short-lived marriage to restaurateur Stephen Crane. From a young age, she was shielded from the public, not because she was born out of wedlock or into scandal, but because her mother's fame required perfection and raising a child, especially one as emotionally perceptive as Cheryl, would expose the cracks in that image. Lana shuffled Cheryl from one private tutor to another, one home to the next, always keeping her just out of camera range. But nothing could shield her from what would happen in 1958, a moment that shattered their secrecy forever. That year, Cheryl, just 14 years old, stabbed and killed her mother's abusive boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, a mob-connected enforcer known for violence behind closed doors. Lana had tried to end the relationship, but Johnny had threatened her repeatedly, and on the night of his death, the violence escalated. Cheryl intervened. The trial became one of the most sensationalized events in Hollywood history. The world finally saw the face of Lana Turner's hidden daughter, and the details were explosive. Lana testified. Cheryl was exonerated, and the press feasted on the image of a child forced to kill in self-defense to protect her mother. Afterward, Cheryl disappeared from public life again. She battled depression, identity struggles, and a fractured relationship with a mother who, despite loving her, had exposed her to unthinkable danger. In her memoir Detour, A Hollywood Story, Cheryl revealed the deep scars left by a life lived in emotional and physical peril, all while the cameras rolled elsewhere. Unlike other hidden children, Cheryl wasn't denied. She was protected until it was too late. 12. Cary Grant and Jennifer Grant, the daughter raised in secrecy and control. Cary Grant, the epitome of Hollywood sophistication, was beloved for his effortless charm and gentlemanly appeal. But behind that smooth exterior was a man of intense privacy, especially when it came to his only child, Jennifer Grant, born in 1966 when Grant was already 62 years old. Her mother, Diane Cannon, was a rising star in her own right, and their whirlwind marriage lasted less than 3 years. By the time Jennifer was a toddler, the couple had divorced. While Cannon remained active in the public eye, Cary Grant withdrew from acting altogether, focusing his attention on business and on his daughter. But his love came with a catch. Grant kept Jennifer completely out of the spotlight. No interviews, no public appearances, no studio visits. She was not to be a Hollywood kid. He controlled her diet, clothing, education, even her sleep schedule, with a discipline that bordered on obsession. Every move was carefully calculated to protect her from the dangers of fame, but also to protect his own carefully curated legacy. Jennifer later described her father as extraordinarily loving and extraordinarily controlling. Despite his tender affection, there was an unmistakable coldness beneath it all, a fear of losing control, of letting the world touch what he held most dear. Then throughout her childhood, Jennifer's existence was practically unknown to fans. Even when Grant died in 1986, many were surprised to learn he had a daughter at all. She had been hidden, not because of shame or scandal, but because her father refused to share her with the world. As an adult, Jennifer wrote the memoir Good Stuff, offering a rare look into the complex, emotionally contained world Cary Grant built around her. She didn't condemn him. But the message was clear. She was loved deeply, but hidden deliberately. She wasn't denied, but she was sealed away like a secret too precious for the Hollywood machine. 13. Bette Davis and Margot Merrill, the daughter Hollywood never saw. Bette Davis, the queen of intensity, the woman with the electric eyes, was revered for her powerhouse performances and her relentless ambition. But behind the curtain of her fiercely public life was a daughter the world never got to know, Margot Merrill, her hidden child. In 1947, Davis adopted Margot with her then-husband, William Grant Sherry. On the surface, it seemed like a loving decision, a Hollywood star expanding her family through adoption. But soon after bringing Margot home, Bette discovered that the baby suffered from severe developmental disabilities, including brain damage believed to be caused by an injury or trauma before birth. For a woman whose public image revolved around control and perfection, Margot's condition was something Davis simply couldn't incorporate into her glamorous narrative. She tried, briefly, enrolling Margot in specialized schools and medical programs. But as her condition proved difficult to manage, Bette made a devastating decision. She institutionalized Margot, quietly, with no public statement. From that point on, Margot's name disappeared from public life. She was rarely, if ever, mentioned in interviews or biographies. While Bette celebrated and mentored her other children, Margot was removed entirely from the family's narrative. For decades, even diehard fans of Davis had no idea the child existed. Only much later, in biographical works and interviews with those close to the family, did the truth emerge. Margot had lived most of her life in a private care facility, far from the red carpets and flashing bulbs that defined her mother's world. In her later years, Davis showed signs of guilt, donating to special needs charities and sometimes alluding to mistakes made in silence. But she never publicly named Margot, not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even in her will. A daughter forgotten not by accident, but by design, because she didn't fit the story Hollywood wanted to tell. 14. Orson Welles and Beatrice Welles, the daughter raised in the shadows of genius. Orson Welles, the revolutionary mind behind Citizen Kane, was widely hailed as one of the greatest cinematic auteurs in history. But while his creative genius dazzled the world, his personal life, chaotic, scattered, and deeply compartmentalized, often left emotional wreckage in its wake. Few understood that better than his daughter, Beatrice Welles. Beatrice was born in 1955 to Welles and his third wife, the glamorous Italian actress Paola Mori. Unlike some of his other children, Beatrice was technically acknowledged. But for most of her young life, she was hidden away, not out of shame, but because of Welles's obsession with control, secrecy, and the preservation of his myth. He was a father who came and went, vanishing for months, sometimes years, chasing financing, women, or cinematic dreams that rarely materialized. When he was present, he was affectionate and magnetic. When he was gone, there was only silence. Beatrice later revealed that she was instructed not to speak to journalists, not to tell classmates who her father was, and not to draw attention to her existence as the daughter of a legend. Orson wanted total control over his narrative, and that meant keeping his child out of it. It wasn't until after Welles's death in 1985 that Beatrice stepped into the public eye, becoming the custodian of his estate and legacy. She fought bitter legal battles to protect his films from exploitation and restore his unfinished work, but always with a bittersweet awareness that she had inherited more responsibility than love. Beatrice once said, "He gave me his name, his wit, and his genius, but he didn't give me a childhood." A daughter raised not in denial, but in deliberate obscurity, shaped by the emotional neglect of a man who loved the spotlight more than he could love steadily. 15. John Wayne and Asa Wayne, the daughter hidden behind the Duke's image. To generations of Americans, John Wayne wasn't just a movie star. He was the embodiment of rugged masculinity, patriotism, and old-fashioned values. The Duke strode across screens with swagger and certainty, a towering figure in the mythology of Hollywood. But behind the Marlboro Man exterior, Wayne had a private world he guarded fiercely, including a daughter, Asa Wayne, who was largely hidden from public view during his prime. Asa was born in 1956, the child of Wayne's third wife, Pilar Palete, a Peruvian actress he married after a series of turbulent relationships. Though Wayne adored his family in private, his public image was a calculated projection of unshakable independence, and fatherhood didn't exactly fit the mold. While John Wayne had other children from previous marriages, some of whom followed him into the film industry, Asa was kept mostly out of the spotlight. There were no press appearances, no father-daughter interviews, no red carpet moments. To the public, she barely existed. Why? Because Wayne's brand couldn't afford vulnerability. His entire career was built on roles where emotion was buried under grit and tenderness was shown only in fleeting, stoic glances. Introducing the world to his soft side, especially his role as a doting father to a daughter, might have cracked the mythos he had spent decades building. But the emotional wall extended beyond the media. In her memoir, John Wayne, My Father, Isa describes a childhood marked by admiration and distance. Her father was warm, yes, but also detached, consumed by work, political causes, and maintaining his public persona. She often had to compete for his attention, not just with Hollywood, but with the very image he tried to uphold. After his death in 1979, Isa finally spoke up, both in reverence and in pain. She detailed the complex man behind the legend, and in doing so, carved a space for herself that had long been denied. Isa wasn't an illegitimate child. She wasn't abandoned, but she was hidden in plain sight, overshadowed by a monument that never made space for the flesh and blood behind it.